Apologies, JJ, you are on mute. Apologies, JJ, you seem to be muted.
Over to you, Professor Msweli.
Launch of our Thought Leadership business series. I just want to acknowledge and thank all the participants in the panel. There could not be a better panel to launch our very first Thought Leadership series. And I want to give credit to Professor Tabane because this is his brainchild in his quest to make SBL UNISA a relevant business school that is really engaged with issues that the community is looking for answers for. I want to just preface by saying I'm grateful for this opportunity to participate in this panel. I am Professor Phumela Msweli. I come from the School of Business Leadership at the University of South Africa, led by our Vice Chancellor, Professor Buleng Lingabula. The purpose of this session really is to engage business leaders, to engage community activists, social activists, political minds, economists around the questions of what do we need to all do? What kind of interventions do we need to put in place in this time where business is completely extraordinary, where the world has reset itself and launched itself into a different context, where a lot of industries have been almost decimated by the pandemic, where growth in South Africa in particular and in Africa has been affected by the geopolitical wars, has been affected by the pandemic. What is our role? Because at the School of Business Leadership at UNISA, we don't want to be an ivory tower set of academics sitting within our halls, writing about issues that will not take us very far. Business leaders have interest in this topic. Economists have interest in this topic. Community members, civil society have interest in the topic of how are we going to work together? How are we going to join hands and make sure that the economies of our countries start to fire once again? Because as we know, economies are misfiring, GDP has dwindled. We also know that there are high unemployment rates throughout the continent. There is a need. And in fact, this is for us at the School of Business Leadership, a call to engage with all of you. Once again, thank you very much for this opportunity.
Opening there. We're going to get on with it now. And I hope that I'm visible. I'm battling a little here with load shedding. Yeah.
You are audible.
Am I audible? All right.
Yes,
I was battling a little bit here with load shedding, but I hope you can hear me. Without any waste of time, I'm going to ask, first of all, to introduce the panel. Hlantipai is an economist. She's going to lead us in this discussion. The president of BUSA is Professor Bonham Mohale. Looking forward to your input there, Prof. And then the president of AMCU is President Joseph Matunjwa. So we have leader of business, leader of the unions, or rather labor, and this is where we can try and see whether we can find a middle ground with academics and other participants. And of course, there will be the huge participants who have joined, around 300 people who are going to also engage with us throughout the dialogue. Without any waste of time, Hlantipai, if you can kick us off, just an analysis from your point of view, 2 or 3 big things that define the current state of the economy, and then I'll ask other panelists to weigh in on how they perceive the state of our economy right now. Thank you.
Thanks very much, JJ, and good afternoon to everybody. It is really an honor to join you. I think it's important because I think we've dwindled a little bit when we talk about what the economy is. And I think one of the things we've always talked about is this idea that of economic growth, and that the economy, if we have the economy growing, then it gives us all the good things. But if we just look at today and we think about the economy of South Africa as being people, so people actually waking up in the morning and doing things, so waking up and going to work, making an income, then on that measure we are doing very, very poorly, because while the economy, I think, over the past 5-10 years has grown, what we have struggled to grow is employment, or jobs, or people actually being economically active. I don't have to remind you, anybody, that we are now heading to the 40% unemployment rate, because as we know, the youth are being left behind, and there are more and more of them coming on stream into the work environment. And the situation that we are facing now is that obviously the economy, as people say, is not growing enough to absorb that. But I'd like to suggest something different, because part of what we have is that if we just think about COVID as a disruption, almost 1 million jobs have not returned since then. That says nothing, of course, about what other disruptions we are still to face in terms of the changing nature of work. But I think more importantly is also to recognize that the conditions that we are facing are not conducive to people being able to work. One of the things that we've touted for a long time is small business. The problems that you're facing, JJ, with the internet, which is connectivity, come from electricity. So the things that should work together are not working together. Where we think young people are going to be participating in the new world of connectivity and the new things, where we have a problem is that people are not able to enter in the economy like that. And then certainly, of course, other challenges of small businesses, because they cannot buy generators. So all of the fundamentals that we need to put us forward in terms of being able to absorb people, make them work, and give them the support that they need, we are not able to bring that. And that brings me to the important conclusion that we've always wanted to talk about, which South Africa has always talked about since 1994, which is the so-called inclusive growth. So where people are able to participate and growing incomes, share in the prosperity, and actually have more skills. So that whole thing where we say, how do we think about an inclusive economy? That we've been failing at, and there are no real signs that we are actually going to hit a better outcome as we go forward. So I think that's really where it is. And one is looking for positive signs such that we can actually say, look, these are the offshoots and these are the positive things. But I think it's difficult because, business confidence is not strong. People are not going forward. Crime is increasing. Electricity, support, infrastructure, energy, All of those things that we need to say, if we are getting this one thing right, we'll do well. So I think that's really the picture. But we'll say more of this in piecemeal as we go along. JJ.
Growth rate has remained almost zero for a while up to now. I mean, if you look at the last 5 to 10 years, we have never passed 2.5% of growth. What are the key factors that are causing that stagnation? And let's minus COVID from it. This same stagnation has been there before COVID.
Look, I think what our first problem is how we define economic prosperity. We like to talk about first growth and we say 2.5%. Where you have to start is to say, how can we grow an economy with so many people who are excluded from it? Remember, an economy is really a conglomeration of people's efforts. So people have to wake up in the morning, go to work, and then start doing things. So you produce 2 cars instead of 1 car. You produce more songs if you are talking about the arts industry. You do more in order for you to say the economy is growing. Otherwise, then it's basically leaving behind, because it is important and it is clear that there are countries where you can have, for example, in Angola for many years, where they needed to just open up the taps of oil and the economy would grow, but that had nothing to do with development, that had nothing to do with employment and jobs. So our measure of hoping that if we just say, well, the economy is going to grow by 2.5%, then we'll see growth. But actually, even if we use that measure, over the past 10 years, since 2008, the economy has grown. Since 2014, the economy has grown. But we are struggling to create those jobs. So if you think about the jobs we've got today and the jobs we had in 2008, just before the recession, they are no more than actually just about, I think, 400,000 jobs. So we don't have much growth in employment since the global financial crisis or after the global financial crisis. But it's certainly true that the economy has recovered. So people have gone. So we can have a recovery on the one hand with the economy, for example, as has done even after COVID, has grown and recovered. And we all celebrate that we are now have the size of the economy that's bigger than what we had pre-COVID. But what we don't have are the jobs. And I think it is important to say that when we think about economic growth, or we should actually maybe abandon this word, economic growth, and think about what do you mean by economic development, economic inclusion, economic participation. Then we might start to talk about the important things, because I think that focus has misled us so that we have the kinds of energy problems that we've got. We have the kinds of problems we have with connectivity, the problems we have in agriculture, and even the kinds of problems we have in policy, because we are doing the wrong thing around what problem it is that we are trying to solve. So if we keep going on about economic growth, I can tell you now we have recovered post-COVID. The economy is multiples of what it was in 2004. I mean, in 1994, in 2004, in 2014, where we don't have the mass success is getting people engaged in doing stuff, in producing, in earning incomes, in growing those earning incomes. And I suggest that we should change that lens that we've used.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. I'm going to ask Professor Mohale to come in there, because the issue is that the targets in the National Development Plan are talking about somewhere being upwards of 5 to 6%. In this case, in about 8 years. Where we are and the pace in which we are traveling, are we headed there? What's your analysis of the state of the economy? Before we come to solutions, we'll have a whole round on solutions, but it's important to just be on the same page about analyzing what is the problem. Where are we ailing? Professor Mohale?
We're very far from reaching the aspirations of the NDP 2030, even though we had 30 years to prepare for it. In fact, all the experts and analysts tell us that we are not going to reach the 11 things that we said are wrong with this economy, and therefore the 9 things that we ought to be doing. The highest GDP growth we've ever had in this country is 5.4%, probably in December of 2007, and then 2008, we saw the rolling blackouts. 14 and a half years later, we haven't been able to fix that. But you see, South Africa has always been helped by global events. Unfortunately now, it's a bleak time for the global economy. I think the world is undergoing a tectonic quake. There's huge regime shift. There's a worldwide slowdown. We are indeed in troubled neighborhood, and we are confronted not with one, but with multiple crises. As the world moves away from financial stability, from predictable financial markets, it moves away from low interest rates and low inflation, and it moves to a new world that is characterized by exogenous attacks. Unpredictability is high, and increased volatility. And we see it being precipitated by a number of things, and it manifests in a number of ways. First, we see supply chain being constrained worldwide. There is labor shortages in most markets in the world. There's both fuel and food price crises, and we see double-digit inflation. We see increasing interest rates. The GDP growth is actually quite low. Globally, we're talking about 1.1 to 2.7 GDP growth. In this country, this year, we are probably talking about 1.9 GDP growth, and the next year, probably 1.2%. All things being equal, if we did everything right. But also at a time that the borrowing costs are increasing, we are probably staring the fifth wave of public debt crisis in the eye. We're seeing increasing global commodity prices. We're seeing reduced global incomes, but also eroding household purchasing power. The cost of living is actually in a crisis as we speak, where there is now increased poverty levels. And we talk about 123 million people just in sub-Saharan Africa that are experiencing acute food insecurity. I think, of course, when we come to solution, there is an urgent need for fiscal coordination by the global markets in the world, including South Africa, which is amongst the top three in the continent. Ntate Nkgopotse?
If I may ask you a question there, in your view, right, is there a reluctance of business to invest? Because there's always this myth, or rather maybe it's not a myth, but an assertion that business is sitting on piles of cash because of policy uncertainty, they don't want to invest. Are we past that hurdle? Is there a spirited, if you like, approach for business to invest in this economy? I saw that you wanted to come in and help on the Transnet situation, which was quite refreshing usually, because you usually just shout on the sidelines. But in this case, you said, let's dirty our hands, let's help, right? That may be a drop in the ocean, that may not be. Just address me on that one before I give in that Dame Matunja to comment.
JJ, you see, we have to puncture some of these inflated fallacies. Business is not an enigma, whether in a communist country, in dictatorships, or in democracies. When there's regulatory certainty and policy stability, business will invest. It doesn't care actually about your politics. But what we have seen in South Africa, I think our single biggest, both systemic and systematic risk is youth unemployment at 74.9%. When you have young people of military age sitting at home, twiddling their thumbs with nothing to do, not only are we asking for trouble, but we are actively inviting it. We set ourselves a herd immunity target for the vaccine rollout of 67%. When we retired the Disaster Management Act, we were at 30.3%. We can't be known as a country, as an economy that sets itself the target like NDP 2030 with the full intention of not meeting those targets. The government debt is now approaching 95% debt to GDP ratio, and this excludes the guarantees to the more than 740 state-owned enterprises and state-owned companies. We need to reduce our public sector wage bill because we've got too many people in wrong jobs where we need them We don't have enough doctors, not enough police women and men. We don't have enough nurses. But we've got too many people at Eskom, probably 15,000 people more. When Van der Bijl created this entity, he did it with 17,000 people only, gave us 56 gigawatt nameplate electricity. Today, we are talking on a best day, probably no less than 27 gigawatt, and we do that at the height with 48,000 people. Today, there's probably 47,772. So it doesn't help that we are now developing new nomenclature. Load shedding, we should call it what it is. It's blackouts. Now we're talking about water shedding. I think what should we be talking about, and Kantipa is absolutely correct, it's a stable, reliable, predictable energy supply, and we should take it from whence it comes. Because at the moment, each time we switch off, the economy lose up to 4 billion rands a day, every day. Between stages, 500 million rands. We wipe off an entire percentage point out of the GDP. God have mercy for the province of KwaZulu-Natal, because they continue to cut their nose to spite their face. With KZN floods 2.0, the first one in Easter, April, the second one in May, all we had to do was to ensure that the stormwater drains are free of mud, dust, and overgrown grass. Half of that water would have run into the rivers and into the ocean. But we're not even doing planned and preventative maintenance. The 2 weeks in July, 19th of July 2021, where we saw the destruction of 200 malls, 11 warehouses, 9 factories. Now that economy is the second biggest in the country. It's working very hard to make sure that it relinquishes this leadership position to the Western Cape, where at least things work. The truck drivers blockade, it's been going on for 5 years, and we haven't acted. The construction mafia, just as early as on Tuesday, one other construction company was saying, we're packing and going. Some of these factories, when the insurance pays up, like Samsung, they are not going to rebuild in KwaZulu-Natal, but they'll go to where there's a little bit of stability. Even funeral undertakers can't operate in KwaZulu-Natal unless they come from those. These construction mafias are saying, you need to give equity to us for free. You must hire people only from our own faction. That's not a way to talk about economic development. Ntate Nkgopotse.
Let's, you see, the big issue here may be the structure of the economy. And I know that Mathunjwa, you have talked about this for a while, that everything else we're talking about in terms of solutions may be tinkering at the margins. But before we get there, can you address us on that? How does your union in particular view the current crisis in the economy? What are the pointers in your view of things that require our attention? Dr. Mathunjwa? Dr. Mathunjwa, are you there? It looks like we don't have Dr. Mathunjwa. Let me come back to you, Prof. Mosweli. There's an issue in the economy that may not be too specific, but generic enough to worry us about the issue about the leadership in the economy. What do your comment about that? I mean, is it a big issue in your view? I mean, what we saw with what Professor Mohale and his colleagues did, I think is fantastic in terms of offering to be part of the solution. Just as recently as a few days ago on the strike, on the Transnet strike. Can you comment on that, on the issue of leadership as part of the crisis mix that we may have in the economy?
prevail was their leadership prowess, was their warriorship, was their ability to make hard decisions, even if it meant death. So we don't have that. We take convenient decisions to save the stomach, to save our earnings. We are very focused, individual focused. We do not take leadership positions for the sake of the future generations. Now, what is the common denominator between the transatlantic age, the colonial rule, the decolonial period? Can you believe that it is conflict? We have become conflictive. The conflicts that happened those hundreds of years ago, they have escalated, they've multiplied, they have grown exponentially. If you look at the number of conflicts that are happening in each African country, and you compare the number of conflicts now with the conflicts during the colonial rule, you'll find that they have quadrupled because we have lost something. We solve problems not by taking a leadership stance. So leadership is about what you said, Prof. Dabane, in your Percy Koboza lecture yesterday, when you said, I will protect and guard this democracy. I will be part of the watchdogs, and I will do that with the last breath. We have lost that aspect of us that want to lead for the sake of the future generations. We are all focused on what's in it for me right now. If I say this, will I lose my job? Will I lose my title? Will I lose my portfolio? Will I lose the votes? Will I? So I just really think that there is a serious leadership crisis right now in South Africa and in Africa. There are countries in Africa that are taking populist, non-populist stances. And now leadership is not something that is only a national issue. It has become a transnational issue because you may say something that might antagonize the North, the East, the South, the West. But as African people, I think it's time now to say, let us focus on rebuilding Africa. After all, so many people died for the freedoms that we are enjoying. Can we really afford not to lead our institutions?
Out. Prof, if I'm completely cut off, you'll have to continue chairing the session. I don't know whether Prof. Mr. Mathunjwa is back with us. If you are, Mr. Mathunjwa, please show yourself. But otherwise, I want to go back to Tlanti and say, right, let's explore some solutions now. There's a lot of problems, as we have all identified, of different types. Energy being one of the big problems that are affecting the rest of the economy. You know, the issue of labor conflict. We've just emerged out of a big strike that threatened to throttle the economy. And then we've got the issue of governance and corruption, just to mention a few. Can we look at 2 or 3 big cross-cutting ideas, right, that would take us out of this economic slowdown, if one is to say? I know you said there's economic growth. I'm not convinced that it is at the levels it should be, even necessarily at pre-COVID levels. But, I'm not an economist. I'm just, just saying my view here. So, Mr. Pai, can you weigh in? Let's kick us off on the solutions, because that's really what this dialogue is about.
Sure. I think that's a very important place to start. And I think, first of all, we have to disregard the myth that there is a recovery coming. Because as we know, the economy and economies have shifted. And I think Prof. Mohale puts it very well, and he says, this is not a South African thing anymore, it's a global thing. So if we agree that we are looking for people to do stuff, so we want people to be active, to produce, to have pride, to rely on themselves. So we want people to be out at work. Then we have to think about what work actually means today. We are already being convinced that work no longer means being a coal miner. It actually may mean somebody being going in on top of being, actually doing renewable energy. So how do we take people to renewable energies? We have been convinced that the world is going into robotics. That's very important. We are thinking about new health systems. We are looking about new production systems, new crops. And so we have to look at those things and say, okay, if the things are already here and the changes are actually afoot, then how do people then become prepared to be able to participate in that? Now, there are some really simple things. So if we really abandon the idea of a recovery and whether we are going to go back to the world we once knew, then we have to prepare people for that world which we are now have entered, not going to. But more importantly, there are also some really good parts of our economy that are really active. So those parts where they are not the fourth industrial revolution, that we are already there. So we think about agriculture, we think about tourism, we think really about transport. Most people are still going to be on the roads. Most people are still going to do tourism. We're still going to need. And then we say, what do we do, and how do we invest in those sectors so that they are producing people who can actually use agriculture, for example, for energy. Remember, biofuels come from agriculture. We still also have to think about something that I find quite interesting that we really don't talk about is that when we think about commodities prices that are going up, we tend to be victims of commodities prices. Yet we have both soft and hard commodities. So we've got maize, we've got the capacity to raise, to grow wheat. We've got the capacity in terms of the hard commodities of the world, the platinums, all of the things that we need for the new world in which we are entering. But unfortunately, we have not been prepared. We were not prepared in the 2000s. We certainly have done nothing, very little to prepare ourselves, at least, for the new world that have high commodity prices. So we should be gaining from the high commodity prices in food, the commodity prices in the minerals that are here. But we're not able to, of course, for the reason that we've got these infrastructure problems in transport and logistics, in rail, in freight. So really what we need to do is to try in energy. We need to invest in that. And I'm glad we've got some people from the labor movement, because one of the things that I've certainly been talking about and I think are very important is where we get that investment. And I think JJ talks to what we're talking about this so-called investment strike. You'll know that the thing is Swalosi, who leads COSATU, has also been making this point about, the pensions or the savings of workers, because we want workers to do better jobs, to do higher paying jobs. And these are industries where they can go into. How do we invest in those sectors instead of bemoaning the failures of so-called investors? That the big investors are certainly workers who have worked very hard. And so how do they get hold of that investment, of those savings, and direct them in a manner that can grow the economy, that can improve their incomes, that can get them better jobs and better paying jobs, but also, most importantly, that takes us to that part of the economy there's been so elusive conflict. So basically, where there is shared prosperity, and it's difficult to share prosperity if you're not capital. And a lot of the capital, as we know, now resides with workers, because for the many years they've been here, their savings and their capital has grown, which they can deploy. So I'm suggesting that, and of course, it also has money in stokvels, in small savings clubs. We tend to be foolish about the idea that poor people have no capacity. Poor people with very little, they are not invalid. They can save, they've got saving clubs. How can they be assisted to deploy their savings, their capital, their energies, their ability to take whatever little they've got to invest in their own energy systems? 40 billion rand by last count is in the hands of stokvels or community savings. Can they deploy that in the energy opportunity that clearly is rising? Can they deploy that in growing food and exporting in the commodities of food that are necessary? All of those things are things that are actually solutions that are staring us in the face, except that we are really still hoping for the big guy to come and save us. But the economy is really in the people's hands. So we have to really mind shift. So if we don't shift our mindsets, then we have no solutions, because the solutions only will come to us when we really shift our minds and we say, here are the sectors, and sectors are with people. They require capital that also resides with people. The decisions are also with us. And then we may be able to move a little bit further. I've been engaged with the Club of Rome and NASENS, the business that I'm leading, to try and raise the awareness to ordinary people about the power in their own hands and the possibilities that exist, so that we can leave behind the sort of, the capital. And then we could still politically engage banks, we could still politically engage international investors, we can still engage publicly and socially all the other investors. That's also important. But the poor engagement is that we have not spoken to each other. So I think that's very important. And I was very pleased to see COSATU raising some of these issues at their Congress and earlier on about who is going to invest in this economy, to what end. And I think that's important, because actually who's going to invest in people? Who's going to invest in skills? These are businesses. So I think the solutions are very, very clear. They're about not the big economy, but the economies where people are, the needs of people, the funds that people have got, and controlling for their own outcomes and for their own needs. My last point would be, for example, I think one of the things we're facing now is the Regulation 28, which is also going to allow people, unions, savers, to export their money. You could invest internationally. But we know that money will go and be invested in the growth and prosperity of other countries. So we have to realize that there is a lot that we can do, and that those who have the power in the hands of workers, in the hands of ordinary people, of women of South Africa, that's where the power resides, and that's where we should be looking to place the economy. For too long, we've done this thing of placing it in the so-called investor and in the so-called big business, when actually the solutions and the time is so ripe for the ordinary person to participate.
Thank you very much. I wanted to engage some more with some of the stuff you raised. I've just made notes. I'll pick it up after I've heard what the other panelists have to say. But a big takeaway for me, it looks like the microeconomy is what we need to be focusing on if we are to solve the bigger issues. Tatema Tunjo, are you now able to give us a comment? I'm worried that we've not been able to get you in. Please, you can start with analysis, your analysis of what is wrong before you respond to the solutions. I'll give you a little more time.
Hi, good afternoon, and thank you once more. I hope you hear me.
We can hear you clearly.
Thank you very much. I think the panelists, they've said it all. They strike all the good notes, and it sounds as if really they know where the problem is. Before, we were saying we are facing with a structural problem of the economy of South Africa. But I think now we are facing with leadership crisis in South Africa. We do not have leaders. And the leaders that are leading us is because they are selected before they are elected. And those who select them, they control them. When it comes to the issue of the economy, if we don't address the issue of this curriculum of South Africa, where our education does not have any relation with the minerals that we mine, I think we will always be the price taker. We can have this platinum, all the minerals beneath the earth, but if we still have the policy that suggests that we need to be told what prices the foreign direct investors they want to buy these minerals with, it's like going to any of the supermarket and tell ShopRite, I want to buy your bread with 5 rand, whereas ShopRite, they'll laugh at you. It's only this country that we have in Africa, in South Africa in particular, whereby we don't have a say in our pricing. And furthermore, the trade agreements that this country has entered into are the one that is making us so poor, because this trade agreement, it makes people not to have jobs, it makes people lazy, because if this trade agreement, we only export all the raw material without beneficiation, then we'll be counting, we said we have 47% of unemployment. It's a self-inflicted, and the reason is this trade agreement that they are entered with, whereby we're becoming a consuming nation. We are no innovation. There is no entrepreneurship in this country. Don't tell me with tenderpreneurs and saying, that is entrepreneurship. That is not entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship must be innovations. And furthermore, if we look how the same government that we voted is destroying the SOEs in the expense of the nation, They are talking about new green energy. The question is, if you switch to this green energy without proper planning, how many people will be losing jobs? And furthermore, you will know for sure, everyone in this panel, they will know that the coal mines that the coal that we mine in South Africa, the A grade of the coal is exported to Europe, and they left with a very bad coal that is the one that causing so many breakdowns in Eskom. And furthermore, if we go for, this green energy that they are talking about, or IPPs, the question is, how much percentage are we contributing to carbon emission as South Africa, as compared to Asia, your China, and even to Europe? And then the question is, how would you then address the unemployment? If there is no beneficiations, if there is no factories, industrialization that can give us a proper employment, education system that has got a relation with our economy, I'm telling you, we'll be still saying all nice things, but we don't want to strike the right chord that until such time we change these economic policies, we cannot just be only the exporters of the minerals. And furthermore, the issue that we are facing in the country as a nation is that we love our political party more than the country itself. So that's why we kept on saying as AMCO, we need to change this electoral system. This constitution that we have in this country is not benefiting us. How would you build an economy whereby we are killing each other a day? People are killed, more than 70 people a day are killed in South Africa. Even where a war-torn country, they don't killing people as we are killing. And the government is so quiet. What is it that is sacred with this constitution that cannot be amended? So those are the practical things that we are seeing. We are an exporting nation. We don't create any wealth for ourselves. We are not in, there is no industrialization. Look at all the SOEs, of which they should be a safety net for the nation. They are being dismantled in the expense of the nation in order to promote, a private sector in the expense of the nation. And furthermore, we talk about corruption in this country. That Zondo Commission is a drop in the ocean. If you want to know, let us, the government, set up a commission that will deal with the corruption in the mining sector. Then you will see all this illicit financial flow, misinvoicing, tax dodging, and all those things. You'll see the real estate capture where it is, but they are untouchable, because the country is run by mineral energy complex, even with the time of Nationalist Party. So even this country of ours, we can say we've got democracy, a democracy without economic power. We can't change anything. We are a facade at the end of the day. There is no democracy if we fool ourselves and think we are independent. Independent when it comes to what? Because we don't control anything. Until we stop building all the malls in the township and build proper manufacturing sectors, whereby each and every mall that is built in the township must have a manufacturing element that we will feed the mall, I think then we'll be going somewhere. But under the current system that we are in, we are just a consuming nation. Like, for instance, look at the war in Ukraine and Russia. I mean, isn't disappointing and embarrassment that we only rely in Ukraine for the cooking oil with the weather that God has gave us in South Africa? We cannot grow our own sunflower. We cannot grow our own wheat. All this thing boils down to leadership. Look at Rwanda. Rwanda is growing at about 7%. Is it what? It's because of leadership of President Paul Kagame. And here in South Africa, we've got stooges that they are praise singers of the system. Nothing has changed. So we have to change. We need maybe the new system in this country. Like, for instance, why can't we go to federal state? Why can't we have a federalism in this country? Each province, they can control their own destination. Limpopo, for instance, you look at Limpopo. Limpopo does not need Johannesburg or Gauteng. They've got agriculture, they've got minerals, chrome, platinum. They can manage their own. Then it will stop people flourishing to one province, which is Johannesburg, for employment. Whereas the employment is right down there, is because there is no beneficiation, there is no accountability. Everything is centralized. We are managed like a remote control. These are the systems that we need to take on and engage on in order to reset South Africa. But at the current path that we are in, we are already right at the edge of the cliff, and it will be difficult to come back.
Thank you. Before I bring in Professor Bonang Mohale to respond to you, can you tell me, there are a lot of things you raised, and I'll address some of them a bit later, but in terms of the constitution, because often people will say, this constitution is not working, let's change it. What exactly, if you give me 2 or 3 economic related issues, would you change in the constitution to make it more functional and more, if you like, people-centered, so to speak?
I mean, if you look at the social discourse in this country, one, I mean, if the crime is so rampant, people are killed each other. I mean, people are being killed. Women are being maimed. The gender-based violence. A person killed the whole family, and when he has to face, I mean, the law, they will say he's got rights. The question is, for instance, this baby that was dismembered in Benoni, I mean, a 4-year daughter he had a great future for the country, maybe was a future president of this country. He's been maimed. That particular criminal will be having more right than the baby that has been killed. So what kind of a constitution, which investment or investors that they can come and invest in the country that is ravaged by criminality as we are experiencing in this country? Secondly, in terms of the land, I mean, all the people that are in the parliament, all those political parties, they cannot even agree on one issue of the land. So where would you grow your economy if you don't own a land? So I'm not a constitutional expert, but in the manner in which this constitution stands, it doesn't benefit us as South African for the last 28 years.
Yeah, no, thank you. I would be interested to know what the other panelists think about that, because if you look at the issue of land, for example, there's a big debate about the fact that the constitution allows for things to happen, and as it stands in terms of Section 25, you may not require amendment because even what is allowed has not been done. And so it goes back to the whole issue of having good policies and poor implementation. And one would want to know from the panel how we're going to deal with that issue, because it has a lot of elements to it, including, you know, issues of no performance management, no consequence management. If, for example, you look at the Auditor General's report, you'll ask yourself the question, who has been jailed for wasting 4 billion, 5 billion, 6 billion rand over the last 3 years every year? Who has been fired over it? And is there accountability? In the private sector, we've seen just yesterday the Hawks are touching for the first time a big name in the private sector. It's not often, you know, last week we saw Bain being banned. Those are good signs, but we need more, I suppose. Professor Mohale, your comment on solutions. What should we be doing? What are the 2 or 3 things that we should be doing to take ourselves out of this mess?
Utatu Mathunjwa is absolutely correct. What we need more than anything else is leadership. And let me start with the issue of the constitution. You see, JJ, you spoke about land expropriation without compensation. We wasted 9 months debating in Parliament as to whether we can implement this. But when you read Section 25, Article 3A, it's very clear. The 8th line from the bottom, it says, when conditions of fair and equitable have been adequately fulfilled, in the public interest. compensation can be down to zero. There is land expropriation without compensation. But I think what we haven't done in 28 years is to bring about the commensurate legislation, because our leaders were focusing on wrong things. For instance, the 400 MPs of Rolihlahla, Nelson Mandela, the one department that had the smallest budget is the Department of Land. Up until today, the one that still does not have a permanent land charge is the Department of Land. And yet people died. We went to war because of land. Even the 27th of June, 1955 Freedom Charter, out of 10 principles, the 5th principle says, the land shall belong to those who work it. The reason why there has not been land reform, which includes land restitution, land development, and land growth and land redistribution for the 13% land that is set aside for 90% of the population. It's precisely because we are really not wanting to do it. Here's a simple example. The failure of land reform is actually because of bribery and corruption in the Department of Land Affairs. It's the government officials who go to the farmers and say, your farm is valued at 1 million. You know what, sell it to us at 20 million, we'll take 10 and you'll have more, and it doesn't go to its own people. In 2016, JJ, you and I are reading an article as we speak of a land just here in Meyerton, Gauteng Department of Human Settlement. The owner of this farm buys the farm for 6.3 million. Just in 2 years, the department goes to him and says, we'll pay you 29 million. They go to a black development company and say, no, you must register this parcel of land for us for 70 million. Your commission will be 44 million, which is 64% of the value of the transaction. When the law that governs this says you can charge up to a maximum of 7%. 70 million, maximum 10% is 7 million. How do you justify 44 million? 6 years later, those 4,000 families that are still in an informal settlement have not been addressed at all. It's now a subject of the Hawks and the NPA. You see, as I conclude, JJ, our problems have everything to do with the fact that we're not even thinking creatively. I'm not even talking about leadership. For instance, there were no casinos in South Africa. All the casinos were in the former homeland areas. We had an opportunity to issue new casino licenses, which is like a license to print money. We have a law called Broad-Based Black Economic Empowerment. We should have given it to these majority of people who are excluded from the economic mainstream. But those licenses went to the usual suspects. When we build malls that Datima Tunja is talking about, we knew from experience everywhere else in the world that when you build a mall in the township, the only people who are going to die are the black shop owners. Instead of saying to Liberty, no, you can build a mall in Alexandra, but make sure that the ownership is by these shop owners whose own income is going to be adversely affected. No, we left it as it is because, again, we are focusing on the wrong things. Only now are we talking about promoting the township economy. Every township where you go to, including Katlehong, Lindela Station, and Soweto, there used to be industrial parks, industrial areas. There was economic activity. We killed it. This ANC-led government, 28 years into democracy, only now are we saying, let's now make a plan. Why is it that the 2.5 million people of Soweto, which is a population bigger than Botswana, Lesotho, Eswatini, and Namibia, it's a whole country, but they still have trucks coming in at 3 o'clock in the morning to deliver bread? A government that simply can't teach its people, provide them with stoves, to bake bread every morning fresh so that the 2.5 million Sowetans can then buy fresh bread from their own. But no, they have to buy bread from Tiger Brands Albany. I think until and unless we go to big business and say it's okay for Sowetans to drive your Mercedes-Benz and BMWs in Soweto, but when they're involved in an accident, there's not even a single motor repair shop in Soweto for these Sowetans to fix it where they are. That's how you create economic activity. This is despite the fact that Richard Maponya owned the first brand new Toyota dealership in Soweto. He owned the first Shell service station in Soweto. But where are we now? We want people to wash, bypass Black Chain where the taxis are, and go to town to buy and get hungry and then buy their food for lunch in town because it's much more fashionable. I think the day we take ourselves seriously and we say, you see, it must look different to break the cycle, then and only then will we move forward in space and in time.
What you are raising is fascinating. Equally fascinating is the fact that you are having conversations with government, with Minister of Finance, Minister of DTI probably. Where is the blockage? Why aren't these ideas finding resonance in terms of restructuring how we are approaching the economy? Just be frank with me about it. I mean, where is the, because what you are raising sounds pretty much obvious. And after 28 years, even if we were slow, we should by now have come up to speed.
One thing that we have perfected and that is stealing at an industrial scale. We have stolen 1.5 trillion South African rands just in 5 years through state capture. In the 9 wasted years, we siphon off, on average, 200 billion just to the 2 Zupta families. So who is concerned about delivering what we have included in our election manifesto year in, year out, year in, that says a better life for all. And yet we know what we meant is a better life only for the elected officials, because they're the ones that have come out of the self-perpetuating vicious cycle of abject poverty. In fact, the majority of South Africans are poorer now compared to when we gained our independence on the 27th of April 1994. When we set ourselves a herd immunity target to deal with the vaccine rollout, that was 40 million people we ought to have been vaccinated at a rate of 100,000 a day every day. Had we done that, it would have taken us 400 days or 13.3 months. When we retired the Disaster Management Act, we've only vaccinated 30.3% of the population. And yet we say we genuinely care about the well-being and the lives, not just the livelihoods of our people. And now we are destroying vaccines because we say, no, there's an issue of hesitancy and expired stock. Because again, we are focusing on wrong things. Youth unemployment. I mean, JJ, let me end by saying, look at how it manifests. One, inequality is widening. Racism is at an all-time high. Black graduates are the ones that are roaming the streets hopelessly. Public health continue to fail the poor and the vulnerable. These hospitals are named after struggle heroes, Charlotte Maxeke, Rahima Musa, Helen Joseph. They don't even have water. They don't have basic services. They don't even have Panado. You know, they break and we're told it to be fixed in a year. 4 years later, some wings are still not open. What type of people are we? Crucial infrastructure that we inherited from the National Party government, the people who don't even like us, is laying in ruin. The houses that they built in Orlando East and Orlando West, those Forunda are still standing. What about the RDP houses that we built? Now we have an official function to unveil a 67,000 check that you can buy from Macro for 4,000, and we call that service delivery. And what about the issue of lawlessness, safety and security? We kill 3 young children between the age of 0 and 17 in this country a day, every day. We haven't declared it the first pandemic. We talk about GBV. You know, our GBV, we hold the world record, not by a factor of 2, 5 times the global average. I think it all boils down to what Ubaba Matunjwa said, which is leadership.
Thank you, Ndadi. I want to give back to Tlantipa. Tlanti, you've listened to unions, union leader, business leader, academic. Where do you think there is a meeting point in terms of what the bridges must be? Because it doesn't look like there is a firm bridge between, if you like, business and labor. In fact, social partners. Because if you look now, the labor is threatening to go on a massive public sector strike. They've just emerged out of another massive strike that cost the economy billions. How can we build bridges between the social partners to try and deal with some of the issues that you raised? Because all of the things that you are raising,
Yeah.
right, all of the things that you've
Yeah.
raised cannot be done by one partner.
Sure.
Otherwise, they'll fail.
So I've had opportunity to work in government before, by working on an advisory panel to a deputy minister, a mayor, and one of the things that you see about the problems that we're facing, and I think there's a lot of stealing, because I think that's the first thing, not so much the collaboration that you need to be able to unlock the potential that is so real. One of the big things, and I think it relates to this question about the land. Is that we know many people need housing in South Africa. Housing isn't part of just human settlements, but it's also wealth creation. That many people who own homes know that that's something they can pass to their children, but they also know that something we can use to borrow again. So it's an asset, it's wealth, it's that which, and it's really obviously on land. Then there's always going to be a big debate about on whose land, and I think that's the first part that's really, really important. But then there's so much opportunity and potential to allow people to own homes. On the one side, business finding solutions, because that would make them rich. Because remember, the developers, the banks that lend into the housing, but also government in terms of the land that the government have or the land they could expropriate in order to build these homes. And then, of course, the wealth and the money that exists in terms of investing into housing from unions, from workers who we know many of them who only when they retire can they own a home. So it seems to me that we sort of have a feeling, but we understand what we want. We want people to create wealth, to share in the wealth of the country, to have assets, to have incomes. We all have figured this out. And we think, but where I think the problem is in all the discussion is this distrust, because I think South Africans, while we talked about shared prosperity, don't really want to share. They want to take for themselves. And I think that may be very well, but at the philosophical basis, I don't have that. Those are things maybe the sociologists would do. But if we really looked at the economic structure, if we looked at what economic opportunity looks like, if we looked at what the contours of our economy look like, it's a no-brainer that there should be no discussion. And so many people, and I think also this was very good, because I thought that Tade Mohale hit it on the nail about the racism that we face. And I think part of that dynamic is also that there's already research, for example, the University of Cape Town has done a lot of work in behavioral economics around this idea of whether or not white people, for example, will do business or will do deals, strategic deals with Black people. And I suspect that's part of the discussion in the sense that, remember, if you are going into a deal, if you're going into a strategy with someone, and if you're going into a strategic outcome, you need to look at the person and say, this is somebody I can do business with. This is somebody I can trust. This is somebody whose thinking I value. And then you go into those kinds of studies. Because many of the things we've got to do are really, really things that are quite strategic in nature, that require a lot of trust, but because I think we have elements of racism, elements of greed, elements of distrust, all of this come to play. And this stuff is in the literature. So, but I think in the end, really, regardless of what we may say, leadership is a clear part of what's missing. Now, it's easy to say that because in broad strokes, people talk about leadership. I mean, economists don't have any kind of work that we can do that really talks about what good leadership is about. But certainly, one thinks there should have been one or two people that have led us into unlocking this potential, getting the table. So, the likes of Madiba, for example, who could come into a room and deal with this, or maybe we need these so-called compacts. But unfortunately, in terms of this compact, we don't have the necessary leadership that we need to take us into those compacts, which would cover these things I've already talked about, that are showing itself in behavioral economics, because there is the stuff that we know is right for us. There's the manner in which we behave, and the manner in which we behave, I think, is very important about where we are. And I mean, in this discussion, one of the things I think where we were listening to the Ntate Mathunjwa, he was concerned because I think where the challenge is, for example, about where is the money of the workers being invested? What are the positions where it's being put? So, for example, say you give workers land. Where would they be able to take their money and invest it in making that land productive? Where is that money being invested, and what outcomes is it reaching for workers? Many workers still retire poor. And so when we talk about land, we don't only talk about actually the ground, the brown thing that's on the ground, but we talk about its uses. When we think about getting people land back, we're not asking for people to be given the piece of land back that they lost in 1912, but the use of the land, the opportunity that was in the land that was taken away, and the skills in the land. And so one of the things we have to contend with is, if we think about the situation that you get the land, but Ntate Mathunjwa was very clear about this, because he talked about what a shame it is that we don't produce fertilizer, even though we have the things that we need. We don't have enough. We don't have enough wheat that we need for the bread. We don't actually make any rice, any oil, all of which are things that we could do here. Now, workers have every capacity to do that because they've got the land. They work in this field in many cases, but nothing. And this investment of workers being a 3-month investment, a 6-month investment in the stock exchange, but really very little that goes into the infrastructure, the land, tilling there. So I think the issue is also about saying, look, what can we do where we are? And as I've said before, one of the big discussions is to wake up people. These kinds of discussions that we're having now are important, because I think then people can start asking those questions, right? About where you are. If I'm a worker, I'm on a shop floor, I can immediately go to my shop steward or to my representative and say, where is my money going? Where is it being invested? And what outcomes is it having for me, for my children, for the future? Because those are the important questions. And I think we may be starting then to have a real conversation about the economy and its content and changing it. But if we're going to be stuck in the Constitution, and I do agree that there are issues there that have to be addressed, there's no doubt about it. There are issues of the courts and the Constitution and the application of the Constitution. There are all those issues. But we've got to lay our buckets where we are. And I suspect that we're not doing that. We are always looking across the street to business, and business always looking across to government. We're not going to build the infrastructure. We're not going to do this because we need to wait for government. Some of the incentives in manufacturing, for example, there are certain things business won't do unless it's incentivized. And it's a shame, because of course we also know that if we just think about, for example, the skills of the future, businesses need to invest in this. And many of them will wait for government to put in, for example, a jobs fund or some other thing like that. And so basically laying to waste potential of young people, laying to waste the resources that we've got. So again, we've got the commodities of the day, we've got the land, we've got all of the things that we need. Where we are stuck now is actually moving forward. And I suspect that while the economists have some answers, many of them may be lying the sociologists and the criminologists of our country. But I think where one has to look at is one to look at where they are and what we've done beyond, say, these are the problems, and what we can do to influence the outcomes that we need. I don't know that I could say more.
Well, wonderful. I think all the panelists, almost without exception, you mentioned the issue of leadership, that there are all these things that need to be done. And because there is a missing piece of leadership or a crisis of leadership, these things are either ignored, not done, or not done properly. Professor Msweli, this is where you come in now. What are we going to do to build a cohort of leadership that can be able to tackle these issues? Because we maybe have problems now, but yes, if in another decade we've got worse type of leadership than we have now. And this you see when you look at, for example, the younger upcoming second layer leadership, as they're usually called, on campuses, at universities, in student movements, and so on. Those are the future MPs but they are already behaving like the current ones, fighting for positions, fighting for resources, being involved in corruption, even at a young age before they even go to work. What are we going to do as the academic sector to try and solve that, or what is SBL's own contribution maybe in dealing with this kind of thing? Because that's really the bottom line. I would like, when we come out of here, to find pointers of what we can do together to contribute something to fix that problem. That seems to be a common denominator across all contribution today. Prof?
Thank you, Prof. Tabane. Well, if you look at what the speakers have said, firstly, we have too many problems. We have corruption, we've got greed, we've got lack of leadership, we've got conflict, we've got misaligned policies, we've got crime, we've got many problems. Let me hasten to say that Africa also has abundance. It has a whole lot of things that other continents don't have. We have everything. We have the hard commodities, the soft commodities. We are the biggest producers of most of the commodities that make us an envy to the West and the East. On top of that, we've got good weather. So I am of the view that you may change your constitution, as Comrade Matunja has said, and he's correct. You may give people more land, and will it change anything? I want to say only one thing. The economic development equation that you need land, you need technology, you need capabilities. We cannot underestimate that, amongst other. You need skill. So if you have already 74% of your youth that are unemployed, the future leaders, what capabilities are you giving them in order to change our trajectory? So I really want to say that, I want to say one thing actually, and that is, for as long as we do not have a strong enough education system that focuses on building the capabilities that will build the economy, the values, because capabilities without values is really going to do nothing for us. So that is why when we talk about capabilities, when we talk about enterprise capabilities, technological capabilities, human capabilities, they must be infused with the value system. And that is why in China, for example, they are advocating a particular value system around Confucianism. If we can really embed Ubuntu, that part of us that make us human, we don't have then to worry about people that are killing children. We don't have to worry about gender-based violence because we have capabilities that are embedded in Ubuntu. And that is the philosophy that we need to have. We need to really ground our education system with the right philosophy of Ubuntu. The second thing we need to do is to really align our industrial policy with the education system. How many billions of rands are being poured into the education system that generates graduates that cannot be employed by anyone? So the answer is in the education system. It is everything to do with where we deploy this money for education. What are the skills that we are producing out of our graduates? And what are the capabilities? Are they aligned? We have a whole lot of misalignment when it comes to the industrial policy, our economic policies, and our national development plan. We are not building the capabilities. If you even do a benchmark and look at what our grade 1 children are learning compared to what grade 1 children in the developed economy are learning, you'll see the biggest problem is capabilities. Yes, we've got policies, but that participative competence to interpret the policy. You can have the best constitution, but if you don't have a participative competence to get people to engage with that policy, it means you're just relying on a few people that wrote that policy. Majority of people cannot interpret it, cannot participate in the well-being, in the positive aspects of that policy. So without saying too many things, I really think us as educators, we have a huge role in putting in place policy frameworks, industrial policy, and then not try and do too many things, have a sequence. Look at what India did. India said, we come from the same place, from colonial rule, but we're going to focus on technological prowess. And they built the Indian country and the capabilities to be number one around technology. What did China do? They said, we're going to be number one in manufacturing. What did America do? They said they're going to be leaders in the financial markets. We need to make the same decisions. The problem is we have too many beautiful things here. We've got the weather, the mineral, but we have 71% of future Africans who do not have capabilities. We generate graduates who do not have capabilities. So where are these capabilities going to come from? We really need to have a big indaba about what we mean by education in South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. That was quite a mouthful. I would like us to agree, Prof, with your permission, that we need to put together, even if it's a very short, I want to call a concept note, right, which will address the issues of leadership in the economy. And I'm deliberately raising it here because all of you can contribute. I've seen your writings. All of you here have written one way or another for Leadership Magazine. And I've loved your work and your perspectives. What I would like to do, like a joint article of some kind, and I'm not sure who can take the lead, because Professor Mosweli, I know you are very busy, but you are also a leadership expert, and it would be good to do a draft that we can then circulate and get everyone here to make an input. We can almost have sections that almost tease out some of the issues you raised here today. And everyone can contribute to that concept paper that we would then table at where it matters, like NetLeg, those kind of things. We could table it at BUSA, we could table it at BBC, we could table it to the Minister of DTI. Right? But we are talking about leadership in the economy. What are the things we need to unlock? Because if we have a dialogue and then we just go home, it then becomes a waste of time for all of us. And I would like us to use this brain power gathered here to trigger that national discourse. I hope that lands well with everybody. Give me your parting shot as we close in a minute. Let me start with you, Professor Mohale.
So as business, we have identified about 5 priorities where we are going to invest with or without government's permission, better with their support than without. So first, I think if we can stabilize the energy supply. Number 2, accelerate select water projects. 3, unlock select logistics industry bottlenecks. And then number 4, unlock the 2.2 trillion rands of infrastructure investment pipeline. And then lastly, improve law and order, because without safety and security, who are we and what are we?
Thank you so much, Professor. That's an excellent summation there of what needs to be done. Your parting shot there, Professor Mosweli? Sorry, let me just see. Have we lost Ntate Mathunjwa? Ntate Mathunjwa? Okay, doesn't look like Ntate Mathunjwa is here. Professor, okay, he's there. Ntate Mathunjwa, your parting shot, please.
Yes, thank you very much. I think we, as the trade union, we want to put more emphasis of MPRDA, social labor plan, for these communities that are hosting communities. They must benefit from the wealth that they are living within. These mines must comply. We want to eradicate all this informal settlement, because the MPRDA is very clear in terms of the hosting community, how they should be treated. They should be beneficiary to this. And we want also to embark on our follow-up to the to the Minister of Mineral, Mr. Gwede Mantashe, about our 60-40 on exporting our minerals. That, like for instance, in Rustenburg, why there is no industrialization, why there is no beneficiation of this platinum. So this is our emphasis that we want to put on. But we really also ask the academia who are present today that until we address the issue of education in this country, that will have a relationship with whatever mineral that God has blessed us with, we will continue complaining about unemployment and creating employment for foreign countries.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Okay. I'm not sure whether I'm still.
JJ, we can hear you well.
He's struggling. I think he's frozen.
I'll go on with my parting shots in the interest of time. I want to say we have a wonderful opportunity. The fact that there is dependency on Ukraine, it's a wonderful opportunity for us. Let us build our own global value chains in our own communities. Let's connect rural and urban. Let's connect Africa to Africa and build our own global chains, our own linkages. That's the first thing. The second thing, let's go back to basics. Let us go and do what made South Africa to conquer apartheid. Let's go back to the street committees. Let's go back to the family. Let us, everyone who earns over 500,000, they must take on a community engagement project to bring back Ubuntu, to bring back self-reliance. Let us remove this entitlement mentality. Let us be accountable, just the value system. But let us go back, every one of us, let us go and form a street committee so that we start at street level to create a business environment to attract investors. Thank you.
Thank you. But let's say, I'd also say we have a great opportunity because of the shift and the change that we are seeing in the world. The new opportunities are ours. You know, one of the things when we think about new renewable energy, we think we've got all of the elements.
So I've got cut off in the end. That if you've given your parting shot.
That's what I'm doing that now. I'm saying, so the opportunity that we've had, the disruption that has come from Ukraine, Prof. Msweli is quite correct, is our opportunity. The opportunity of renewable energy is our opportunity because we've got the inputs in terms right here underground, whether we're thinking about manganese that can support the batteries of the future, the cars of the future, the steel, everything that is needed.
Thank you, Ntate. Can we get Professor Msweli your parting shot, and as you have the last word?
I've already issued my parting shot.
Professor Msweli?
And that is, I've already issued my parting shots, and that is, let us go back to basics. Let us take advantage of the opportunities offered in creating rural-urban linkages, creating our own value chain, because we have everything. We've got the resources, we've got the minerals, we've got the talent, we've got the youth that is unemployed. And let's go back to street committees and restore order in our families, in our streets, in our communities, so that investment can come to our communities. Thank you.
Plato said, "Who will guard the guardians? Who are our guardians? Do they care about us? Are they accountable for their actions, or are they above the law? Who elects these guardians? Us? Them? Someone else? And if they guard us, who will guard them? Who will guard the guardians? The Malin Guardian, if you really want to know.